guys, it has been a very, very crappy start to my week because I feel sick. Hi guys, so welcome to my last reading vlog for January and for the HouseCupathon. Sorry if I'm very, very low energy in this clip. I just have not felt good all day. I basically stayed home from work today because, I don't know, I woke up this morning with massive nausea, and every time I moved, I felt like I was going to throw up. I had an awful headache, and I think was making my nausea worse. And I woke up at 6:30, and I got in the shower to try to see if that would help. And lo and behold, when I get up out of bed and actually get to the bathroom, I throw up and take a shower, and then I throw up again. On the bright side though, because I was not feeling well, I got to stay home today, and Robert had me watch the Mummy movies while I was in bed. I watched the first one out in the bedroom because he put it in before he went to sleep, and then he fell asleep, so I brought the second movie out into the living room and watched that one. So it's been overall a really relaxing day. Like, I haven't done anything at all really all day, but I've just felt so sick, so I'm kind of like, it's been really more of an okay day as opposed to a great day. This week though, I do want to try to get a few things done, like reading wise, before the end of the month, because Friday is the last day of the month. I am still working through the audiobook of Barefoot by Elin Hilderbrand. I've only got a couple hours left of that, but I'm still not enjoying it. I feel like I've gotten so far into it though that I need to finish it. I'm kind of sitting at like a 2-star with it. I just really don't like it. I don't like a lot of what was going on with it. And I don't like really any of the characters at all. Like, I don't feel for them. Then I'm still working through Something Strange and Deadly, which is my random TBR pick for January. I'm nearly done with that. I've only got like an hour and a half, I think, left according to my Kindle of the book, but that one I'm not liking as much either because, I don't know, I don't feel like the writing of the story is as great as I wanted it to be. I feel like it's kind of mediocre in a few different ways, but I think this was Susan Dennard's first series in her debut story, so I think that that's kind of why, like, it wasn't just as crisp of a writing style as I would have liked it to be, but I think that that's because it's also a product of its age and its time, because I think the first book came out in like 2012, which was like the height of the paranormal stories, and a lot of them didn't have very good, crisp writing styles that we would see now. So I'm kind of teetering back and forth of whether or not it's kind of a product of its time or if it's just not good enough for what I have because of my standards now. So I'm kind of sitting at a 3-star with it though. Like, it's kind of just, it's good. I like the story. I just don't think it fits anymore with what the standard is for stories, which I really shouldn't even knock any points off of it for that, because, you know, I wouldn't do that necessarily to a classics that was written in like the 19th century, but for some reason I'm just not jiving with this book as much as I thought I would. I don't feel very well still. I'm kind of battling a headache, like right up here in like the top of my forehead, and then it's kind of moving towards my temples. I've already taken Excedrin about maybe an hour and a half ago, and so I can't take any more. Probably start drinking some water though, because maybe that'll help, because I know I haven't really drank any water at all today so far because I've been drinking Werner's, because Werner's is a ginger ale soda kind of thing, and that typically when I am very nauseous really helps settle my stomach for some reason, because I think it is the ginger in it or whatever. I don't know, it's just always as a kid worked for me. I don't know if I'm gonna get any other reading done today because my copy of Barefoot is due back, I think, by the end of tonight, maybe tomorrow. So I do want to finish that, but I don't know if I necessarily want to. Like, I just don't. I really don't. But I don't want to DNF it either and only get 5 points for it, because the book itself I'd get like 70 points for. I just can't make up my mind of what I want to do because I don't feel good. So I'm just going to sit here and probably just watch some YouTube videos for a little bit until I come to a decision of what I want to do. Hey guys, so it is Tuesday night now. I just returned home from work. It's a little after 6. I basically was able to get out of work a little early today because I was going to be there till about 6 o'clock, but there really wasn't anything for me to do, nor was there really anyone there, so I left at about 5:15, which is normally like the time I'd be home. Like, I'd be home usually between 4:45 and like 5 o'clock. So it's very weird for me on days when I have to actually stay at work later, because I feel like my whole week is completely run off, and I have to be there about 6 or so the rest of this week. Today I have finished 2 books already, and I am well into my another book I'm working on right now. This morning I ended up finishing the audiobook for Barefoot by Elin Hilderbrand, which I gave 2 stars because I really didn't like this book in a lot of ways. I feel like I hated almost all of the characters. I feel like that was the big thing about it, was I didn't feel like I connected to very many of the characters. And the ones I felt like I connected with, I feel like were just because they were dealing with things that, you know, you obviously would have to feel bad for them, because one of the characters in the story has cancer, and a large part of her story in this book is dealing with going through chemo and trying to figure out like how she's going to manage this with having 2 very young children and being on this island, which has normally been really great for her in the past, but being here for a completely different reason, which is for her to recuperate from this sickness. And she was one of the only people I actually cared about in this story, and it's because of her cancer. And I don't like liking a character just because they're sick. Like, I want them to have more substance, but I felt like this character, that was all she was just her sickness. And I felt like that just really detached me a lot from this story. And the rest of the characters I really didn't care for. I didn't care for any of the females in this story, because we not only had one with cancer, we had one who was accused and pretty much found guilty of having a sexual relationship with one of her students who actually is older than her, and she kind of got herself into some trouble with that. And then we have another character who is pregnant, and her husband has been cheating on her, and she essentially, when she was going on this trip with her friend, she ended up finding out she was pregnant after going through 7 rounds of IVF. And so the whole story, just for each individual person, was really kind of just annoying to me, because it was very much the entire time, woe is me, my life is falling apart, I have no substance other than my predicament, and I have no other personality traits other than what my predicament is. And I felt like that's how the entirety of the story went, and I don't know, I just was very bitter about that, because I felt like that there were some great things about some of these girls, these women actually, that could have been really brought up more, but they were so stifled by their negative traits or their negative aspects that it just completely overran the entire story, and it just made it so much harder for me to enjoy. Like, I cannot believe I actually finished the book, for one, because I got so freaking annoyed by the entirety of the story. And there were some good moments here and there that I liked, but I feel like overall it just was not what I wanted it to be. So I gave it a 2 star. The other 2 Elin Hilderbrand books I've listened to by her are good. This one just was not it. And it's possible that that's because this one is so much earlier in Ellen's career. This book came out in like 2007, whereas the other 2 books I have read by her were post 2015. So my guess is that this one, Barefoot, probably is going to be one of the ones I'm going to like the least, because it's so much earlier in her career. And I just felt like the other 2 books I read were much more polished and much more centered on the good aspects of the characters. And while there may have been some issues that had been going on in the story, the characters in these other 2 books I had listened to were not the ultimate aspect of their character. Like, the characters that I read in the other 2 books I read by Ellen were really well-rounded and really fun to read from. This one just wasn't it for me, unfortunately. So then I also ended up finally finishing Something Strange and Deadly by Susan Dennard. This was my January 2020 random TBR pick, and I was a little disappointed with this one, but I think it kind of is in the same vein as why I disliked Barefoot, and I think that's because this book is so early on in Susan Dennard's career. This book was released in 2012 at the height of the paranormal activity books that kind of came out with supernatural beings and all that kind of stuff. I felt like just this one in particular, the writing was very juvenile, and I just felt like for some reason it didn't jive with me as much as I had wanted it to, but the overall story and the overall kind of conflict that was going on and the characters that were involved with it were actually really interesting. I just feel like it wasn't fully executed to what it could have been, and that is entirely possible because this was Susan Dennard's very first book that she ever published. So it is entirely possible the rest of the series could get better, and that the Truth Witch series will be absolutely 100 times better than this series will be, because these other books are so much further in her career. So I did give Something Strange and Deadly a 3 out of 5 star though, because I did enjoy it for the majority of it, but I felt like it just took me a long time to get through it because I wasn't as invested in it sometimes, and I think that was because the writing wasn't really gripping me a lot of times until probably the very end of the book, which is fine for a first novel, but I feel like just especially for me, I want something that's going to really grab my attention and get me going to where I'm going to be so excited for the next book that I want to pick it up immediately. And this one wasn't the case so much, but I am interested in seeing at least what does happen, because the end of the story left off on a very different note than I expected, and I was actually pleased with it because it gave me more room to think about what could possibly happen with the main characters and where they could go from here. And what was interesting too was that there was this really interesting way of looking at zombies and what they were basically about. So if you don't know anything about what Something Strange and Deadly is about, it is a book placed in the late 19th century Philadelphia area, and it is about a young woman named Eleanor Fitz, who is not exactly an heiress, but she's the daughter of a fairly wealthy family, or used to be wealthy family at least, in this little area near Philadelphia. And essentially there is this thing going on in the world right now, and especially in the States, where there are dead people actually being brought back to life, and we have basically the zombie apocalypse, if you will, happening. There is the idea that there is this necromancer that has basically been bringing up these dead people and creating an army from them. But nobody knows who the necromancer is or why they're doing this. And Eleanor feels that there is it has something to do with what her brother is doing, because she gets a telegram from him that essentially leads her to believe that he has been captured by this necromancer and is being held hostage. And so for her to be able to try to save him, she joins up with this team called the Spirit Hunters, who are kind of looked down upon because nobody really knows how to think about them, because they are helping out everybody, but nobody wants to actually give them the tools to help them because they don't trust them. And she joins up with the Spirit Hunters to try to find out what exactly is happening. Along with all of this, there is this weird spirit that keeps following Eleanor around, and she's not sure what it is. She's not sure if it is her late father's spirit who died 6 years prior. She doesn't know if it's something a little bit more nefarious and a little bit more evil, and so she's also trying to find out a little bit more about that and what's exactly going on. This was a really interesting take, I think, on the idea of the zombie, because it basically leads to someone to believe that they're just completely mindless. Like they are being controlled by someone, but there's another aspect to them that comes later, where when they're kind of untethered from, when they've been reanimated and they're untethered from the magic that kind of reanimates them, they become what are called the hungry. And those end up becoming the flesh-eating zombies that most of us come to know and realize. And before that though, they're just called the dead, where they're just being controlled by some kind of magical entity. And it's just a really interesting look, I think, at this idea of the zombie and kind of having this multiple layers effect about how these zombies kind of work. And I think it's very interesting, and especially with the ideas of necromancy and what can possibly be going on with that. And there's a lot of talk about some of the things with electricity, because in this time electricity is getting really, really popular. It's becoming a big thing. So there's elements of that are played into the story, and how spiritual energies kind of work and all these different things. It's just very fascinating to look into, and I think was one of the more endearing aspects of the story that I think I enjoyed the most. So with all that said, those are the 2 books I finished so far today, and I am currently almost halfway through The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo by Stieg Larsson. Now, this is an audiobook that I had wanted to pick up a long time ago, and I don't think I ever got it around to it, because I think by the time I went to get to it, it ended up having to go back to my library. But this one's a little hard to explain because there's a couple different stories going on, but I only can really tell you what one part of the story is because it makes the most sense. The other one, I'm not so sure. I think I have to look up some spark notes or something like that on the second storyline that's going on, because I'm just not sure what the point of it is, but I know that basically both of these stories have some tie where the main characters know each other and they are very close with each other. I just don't know what this second storyline is about, but let me tell you about the first one. So the first story of this, the first storyline, really the main storyline, I would say, of the girl with the dragon tattoo is this man. He is a investigative journalist in Sweden. I think near the Stockholm area. And this man, he's kind of been under some major legal battle with something. I haven't quite figured out yet what exactly that all is about, but he's in some really big legal battle, is in a lot of trouble. And so there's this really rich individual near the Stockholm area who knows of his work and knows what he does, and essentially hires him to supposedly write his autobiography. This man is 82 years old. I think he's like a billionaire or something at this point. But what the real thing is, so he tells this man that everyone's gonna think that he's working on the biography of this family, this really wealthy, long lineage-like family. But the real thing that he's going to be doing is he's going to be researching and trying to solve the disappearance of a family member that had gone missing about 40 years prior. No one knows where this young woman had gone. No one knows if she's alive. Most people assume she's dead and had been murdered, but this older gentleman who was her uncle does not think that is the case, and he wants this investigative journalist to essentially go back through all the things that they have collected over the years, like police reports and stuff like that, and try to essentially find out what happened to his niece Harriet. There is a lot of talk about rape and sexual assault, but I haven't really quite figured out what the second storyline is about as of yet. I know that it deals with this girl that knows the other main character, but I don't know what it's supposed to be. The weird thing is that when I remember this movie had come out, when this book had the movie adaptation come out, for some reason I thought this was supposed to be more of a sci-fi book. I thought for some reason this character Lisbeth was supposed to be some kind of like mutant, or she had some kind of telekinetic powers. Like, I don't know if that's something that comes up later, if that's the case or what, but this book is coming out to be more of a mystery and not so much a thriller at this point, but definitely a mystery story, and I'm kind of digging it, but it is not anywhere near what I had thought it was going to be. Like, I had really no idea what to expect with this, but for some reason, remembering the movie adaptation trailers that had come out a few years ago when this movie was being made, it seems like it was going to be more sci-fi based. I don't know why. So I've gotten through almost halfway through it at this point, so depending on how tonight goes and depending on how tomorrow while I'm at work goes, because I do have a meeting I have to be in tomorrow morning specifically, I may get through this entire audiobook tomorrow before I leave work. I am going to be picking up, I think, Aragon tonight or maybe tomorrow. I'll take at least with me to work tomorrow, which is one of my challenge picks for the HouseCupathon, but because I only have a few days left of the HouseCupathon, I do not think I'm going to finish it by Saturday, which is our live show. Hey guys, so it is about 8 o'clock right now on Wednesday night. I've been home for about a little more than an hour, and I've just been kind of sitting with Robert. We basically folded laundry and then just hung out for a little bit, and now I've got the oven preheating to throw pizza in the oven for myself, and I've got a nice little glass of wine in my new little wine sippy cup thing, I guess. My mom basically got these for me and my bridesmaids because I built them bridal boxes that basically had a small bottle of the wine that I'm actually drinking right now, which is the Barefoot Pink Moscato Champagne, which is divine, by the way. That is so good. So I got a little bottle of those for each of the girls, and then we each got one of these. The girls all got t-shirts that my mom made. Mine says bride, my maid of honor says maid of honor, the bridesmaids say bridesmaids, and then like there was a note from me for them in the box, as well as some chocolate. And because these came in packs of 2, I decided to take one for myself because the 3 of them went to my bridal party, and then there was just this other one, and I kind of wanted one myself. So today I did finish The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo by Stieg Larsson. This is actually more of a psychological thriller in a lot of ways. It's very mystery based. The psychological part doesn't really come in until much later in the story, but there's also a little bit of I don't know, not necessarily political things going on in the story, but there's a little bit of a storyline that deals with one of the characters of this. Now, I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, but let me tell you guys some of the things that I feel like I didn't like so much about this book. So as I stated before, this book has a major trigger warning for sexual assault and rape specifically. There is a lot of that in this entire book because it is pretty much the entirety of one of the characters of this story. Like, it's a huge part of what she goes through leading up to her involvement in the story, and it is not pretty. It is not very fun. It is absolutely devastating and really, really kind of damaging in a lot of ways. And I've always thought of myself as someone who's a little more desensitized to very triggering content like this. But there are some cases where I feel like, especially if a book focuses so much on things like rape or, very, very graphic content like that, if a book has a little bit of that, it's okay. I'm not really that triggered by it. But for some reason, if a book has like a lot of that, where it's like almost the entirety of the story has some instance of rape or gore or whatever it is, I am a little more turned off by it, because I feel like sometimes it's a little too much. And I feel like in this book, it was a little too much, because essentially what we find out is the real reason why this girl, Harriet, ended up going missing 40 years ago. And it deals a lot with sexual assault and things of that nature. And I feel like that, on top of all of the sexual assault and rape that we see for the other character, Lisbeth, in this story, it just was a little much for me, and I would have preferred there not to be nearly as much graphic content in that regard as possible. However, the whole character of Lisbeth was actually based on a friend of Stieg Larsson's that he had supposedly witnessed be gang raped by some male acquaintances of his when he was growing up. And so the character Lisbeth is supposed to be kind of a reminder of that individual. So I understand why she had a lot of scenes where she was shown as a rape survivor, because not only was she supposed to be shown as really strong and end up becoming resilient, but then also to show how her abuser was evil, essentially. And then when it comes to the crux of the story, where we find out why this woman Harriet had been missing for 40 years, it was just a little much. I think that with everything we had seen up to that point, it just became a little much and kind of a little over the top, but I still really did enjoy it. I will say, though, I feel like throughout most of the story, at least from the first half of the book, I was very confused as to what happened, because there was this whole storyline that was going on, which is part of the reason how one of the main characters even gets involved in the story, is that he's trying to basically dig up dirt on this guy who accused him of libel, which, if you don't know what libel is basically where you go to like a news source or something like that, and you say things about somebody that are not true. So one of the main characters, Mikael, he has been accused of spreading libel about this really big CEO in Stockholm, and he has been tried and he's going to be going to jail for a few months, but it's deferred. So he goes to jail at a later point. And so the reason why he's actually going into this case of finding this woman Harriet is because the guy that hires him says to him that he will give him information on the guy that basically put him in jail, and it'll make him be able to bring this guy down. That whole storyline kind of just was a little warbled to me. I didn't feel like I understood it, but I don't usually understand a lot of stuff about lawyers and, that kind of stuff. Like, I don't understand much of court systems other than when it relates to the specific story. Like, I can follow a court scene where it's involved in the story and it makes sense and follows like the actual plot, but if it's a separate thing, a separate entity from the story, I feel like I get very lost with that very quickly. Here is one other big crux that I have with this story, and that is this story is really supposed to be about Lisbeth, because apparently the entirety of the Millennium trilogy that there is, it's supposed to follow Lisbeth in different points in her life. And this book made it more out to be that Mikael was supposed to be the main character and Lisbeth was a side character. And I feel like it just doesn't make sense. At the same time, some of the events that happened at the very end of the book made it easier for me to see why the story kind of continues with Lisbeth as opposed to Mikael, because things happen at the end of the story between the two of them that makes them go down very separate paths. And it makes me interested to see what the next book's supposed to be like. But I think that just in general, the overall setup of the novel and the overall proportion of the story followed more of Mikael's story than it did Lisbeth's. And I feel like if you're gonna have Lisbeth as your main character throughout the entirety of the series, you should probably have more of the story following her and have a bigger proportion of the story for her, as opposed to this other character who is supposedly not as important as Lisbeth is. Like I said, regardless, my overall enjoyment of the story was that I really did like it a lot. It was not perfect by any means, but I really liked a lot of what the story had going for it, and I really do see how it became a very popular series in the time that it was released, and I definitely see why people wanted to make it into a movie, because there's a lot of great things about this story that could be involved in a movie. I just didn't know that it wasn't sci-fi based. For some reason, sci-fi stood out in my mind with this series, and that was the completely wrong answer. That was just not even anything to do with what the book was actually about. So the next audiobook I'm actually working on now is Room by Emma Donoghue, which this one I did not expect to be as dark as it is. I pretty much with this one knew nothing about it going into it, but I'm about almost a third of the way through it at this point, and it is freaking dark. The whole story is told from Jack's perspective, and what he describes is that he and his mother are basically trapped in this room, or like this really small house. It's not quite determined. I feel like it's supposed to be just like a studio room, really, where everything's kind of together, as opposed to having separate walls separating like a bedroom and the bathroom and the kitchen and everything. And basically what you find out very early on in the story is that they're trapped there. The mom has been trapped there for God knows how long, and she has this man that comes over quite often that essentially seems to be her captor and supposedly the father of her child, Jack. It's hard for me to explain this because it's very, very dark and very hard to, I think, explain without spoiling a lot. What I do know about it, though, after reading the synopsis of the story, is that somehow she decides that she's going to try to save her son, and she's going to try to get him away from this area. I don't know if that's ever going to actually happen or not. I don't know if that's like a wishful thinking thing that's going to happen in the story, or if she's actually going to escape. But yeah, it's very, very dark. But like I said, it's all told from the perspective of Jack, who's 5. So it seems a little more innocent than I think you would think, but sometimes innocence can be deceiving, and innocence can actually be a lot more disturbing than most people would like to believe. Some of the things that Jack basically talks about with how things kind of go day to day at this place that he lives seems to be okay, because that's all he really knows, and so he thinks it's okay. But to the normal person, from a more normal viewpoint of things, it's definitely not okay. It's actually quite uncomfortable most times as I've been listening to this. It's almost the entire time I've listened to this while I was at work today, it was very uncomfortable, because it was just so sad to not only hear about this woman being trapped there, but to hear like a 5-year-old basically talk about some of the things that would happen here day to day. And the relationship between the mother and the son is very, very well established. It's very, very close-knit, and she doesn't fool him a lot of the time like you probably think she would for a 5-year-old. Like, she actually teaches him very important knowledge about how things work and what things do. But she's also very scared, because this man, who I guess is her captor, she doesn't want him to associate himself with her child, and I think this is partially because she knows like how bad this guy is, and she doesn't want her son to end up like this. So I'm very nervous to see how this plays out, and I'm kind of almost at a point where like I'm so uncomfortable that I think I may DNF it, because I am just kind of sitting here and I'm very heartsick, and it makes me sick to my stomach to listen to more of this. But I also want to know what happens, because I want to know if little Jack ends up okay in the end. Like, I want to know, I want to be able to get to the end of the tunnel and see that he comes out the other side minorly scathed compared to what I think he could end up becoming. I also did start my copy of Aragon, which is my letter challenge pick for the HouseCupathon. I highly doubt I'm going to finish it by the end of this week, but I figured I would at least start it, and then maybe like it's one of my first books I finish in February. Probably going to be the case, which I would be totally fine with. I just don't think I'm going to be able to finish it before the end of the HouseCupathon. So what I'm going to do now, though, is I'm actually going to be editing last week's vlog and get that uploaded tonight before I go to bed. The pizza's in the oven. It's going to be in there for like another 20 minutes or so. So I'm just going to, sit, enjoy my evening and drink my wine and just Have a good ass night. Good morning, everyone. It is Saturday now, February 1st. Holy shit, it's February. I have now less than 9 months until I get married, and that's freaking staggering to me. I think the last book I was talking to you guys about was that I had started Room by Emma Donoghue, and I think that was on like Wednesday, and I finished that. I finished that audiobook, which was very, very good, but very, very dark. I ended up giving it 5 out of 5 stars, and I really loved it. I just, it's one of those books where like it's hard to get through because it's just so devastating to see these things happen to a 5-year-old character, especially like the events that take place in this story are definitely things that, you would expect an adult to have to go through, and for a 5-year-old to go through some of the things that happen in this novel and see it from his perspective and get his ideas on it, it's just very jarring. It's very mind-boggling that this kid even has to go through with all of this. And it's not all bad, it's not all good, it's just kind of one of those things where like the kid's a victim of essentially trauma. The kid's a victim of circumstances that he did not willingly put himself into. He was literally born into the situation he was in, and it's just one of those things where like you see him trying to figure out how to adjust from a life that he thought he knew and transition into a life that is actually more better suited for him and actually is a lot better for him in general. It's just very interesting, and I just found that I loved it, even though my heart had broken so many times over the course of the novel. So then after I finished that, I immediately picked up The Death of Mrs. Westaway by Ruth Ware, which is, I would say it's more of a mystery than a thriller. I feel like now, after this being the second Ruth Ware book I have read, she definitely plays on the more mystery elements of things as opposed to thriller aspects. Now, The Death of Mrs. Westaway is about a woman who is in her early 20s. She's about 21 years old, and her mother passes away 3 years prior, and she gets a letter after having struggled with money for a good long while. She gets a letter in the mail from this estate of someone that is supposedly related to her, and it tells her that she is in the will and likely a benefactor of a older woman who has recently passed away named Hester Westaway. And this is supposedly this young woman's grandmother, who she supposedly has never met. Because unfortunately for her, her mother never really told her much about her family, didn't say anything about who her father was or who her family was or where she came from. So this main character named Harriet doesn't really know anything about her entire family. Thinking though that this is a mistake and that there is no possible way that it could possibly be her that's getting any money, she decides to basically trick everyone and try to take some money from the estate, because if everyone thinks that she is a part of this family, why would she deny that and get some free money out of it just to pay some bills and pay back a loan shark that she is involved with? But when she gets there, she finds out that there are some really dark secrets about this family, and that there are some very dark things about her mother's past that are involved, and it just becomes this big brouhaha trying to find out who exactly her mother was and how did she really play into this family, because there's some things that she finds out that really change her whole scope of what her mother had taught her. I found it to be overall very enjoyable. Now this I found way more enjoyable than The Woman in Cabin 10, which I read probably about a year and a half, almost 2 years ago or so. And I liked The Woman in Cabin 10, I just didn't like the writing style. I didn't feel like I connected well with the main character. Whereas with this one, I felt like the main character was much more involved. Like, she was constantly questioning everything. And it was very interesting too, because the main character is also a tarot card reader. So that plays a huge part in this story with her making her decisions, which doesn't necessarily lead her to make her decisions, but it kind of gives her an idea of kind of how things are. And the tarot cards in each instance seem to actually be pretty cognizant of the fact that there are these things going on, which I think is fascinating, because I love the idea of tarot cards. I think they're very fun to look at, and I think that they definitely can be, hit or miss with what exactly, is going on. But for the most part, they tend to, explain things exactly as how they are, depending on what you draw and what you're feeling at the moment. Like, it's just one of those weird things where I'm like, yes, it could be fake. Yes, it could be real. Like, I don't know which to go with, but that was a huge element of the story story that I found to be really fun because it was consistent, it was consistently placed in, and actually had a purpose as opposed to just being like a parlor trick that this main character had. Like, she actually had some substance with these tarot cards. And when it came to the overall reveal at the end of the story, I found that I had predicted it, but not in the way that I had thought. Like, I thought that the story was going to go one particular way, and it kind of did, but it did kind of split off into something that I had not expected, which I found to be very interesting because while I was not necessarily surprised by the ending, I was definitely interested to see that it went in this particular way that was slightly different than what I thought it was. And I found that to be interesting because I don't like the idea of necessarily always predicting the ending with these mysteries, but I found it to be still really enjoyable, even though I did kind of predict it, but it wasn't perfect by any means. I feel like this one was still kind of like and like it was kind of bland throughout most of it, and then parts of it were really good, and then like towards the end of it was where we actually got more of the thriller aspects of the story, because typically with stories like this you have the buildup of the mystery and finding out what's going on, and then towards the end, you know, with the big reveal that happens, there's some violence that happens which adds some thriller aspects. But I definitely would not say this is a thriller of any kind. I would say that this is actually more of a mystery, and it's very suspenseful too. Like, there's a lot of suspense built up because especially when we start to get a lot of things revealed about this family, and especially about Hal's mother, and understanding who she was and kind of where she came from, it definitely leaves a lot of suspenseful elements to be played in because you're not really sure what's going to come up next, which I really like. But I still would not say this is a thriller because I wasn't like having heart-pounding moments throughout all of it. I felt like I kind of was just coasting along as I was listening to the story and just kind of like taking in everything that was going on and trying to piece it together. The reveal was a little confusing at times, but by the end of it, I finally understood what had gone on and who exactly was Hal's mother, and you know, where she came from and all these things. Like, but towards like the end of it, like, it started to get a little confusing, the threads of the story, but by the end of it, it cleared up, and that I found to be satisfying because I was very confused at one point. I'm like, how is this happening? What exactly happened? And then it came to the actual ending of it, and then I was like, oh, that's what happened. And then finally yesterday, I did read the entirety of 50/50 by James Patterson and Candice Fox. So this is the second book in the Harriet Blue series. And I gotta say, I was actually kind of disappointed with this one. I really liked the first book, Never Never. I liked it a lot, but this one just kind of felt more of the same in a lot of ways, and I felt like the ending was such a disappointment. I just didn't feel like I cared for Harriet anymore. I didn't feel like I cared about the story. I kind of felt like a lot of what this story had in it could have just been thrown into like the end of Never Never. But see, here's my big issue with it. This story follows Harriet after her first case since her brother has been thrown in jail. Basically, there's this whole storyline where her brother Sam is in prison and is being accused of murdering 3 young women, and she doesn't believe that he did it. They grew up in foster care, and she's never had any inkling that he has ever had these violent tendencies. And she's trying to help prove that, but because she is a cop and his sister, the police cannot let her get involved in this case, which is why in the first book, Never Never, she goes out to essentially like the outback, where she is going to a really small town to solve this case of this murder that happened. And 50/50 is pretty much the same. The big difference though is that the case is different, which is fine. I like that. That was great. It added some different kind of stories to it. And the overall progress of her brother's case changes. The case itself that Harriet goes on is that a town sheriff of a different town that she goes to in the outback is murdered, and there is supposedly a bunch of bombs placed in this little area that are set to kill a bunch of people. Like, somebody is going to try and kill off this entire town of 75 people, and no one knows who it is, no one knows why, and so Harriet has to basically find out who that is and what's going on. And while all this is happening, her brother's case is still going on, and there is a woman, I don't know how she's really played into it. I don't think I paid attention to that, but there's a woman that was kidnapped who basically could like really explode on this case. Like, I think she's a witness of some kind, and she's kidnapped and not tortured, not anything. She's not really hurt at all, but she's just basically being held hostage. and it kind of puts the case at a standstill because they can't move forward without this witness, and everyone's trying to go out and find where this witness has gone. And so Sam is being looked at still for the supposed kidnapping of this woman, like he might have a partner or something like that. And I don't know, I felt like with this one I would care more about the story of Sam's case than I did this other case. Like I found it kind of like a cheat almost that Harriet still had to be removed from the situation, and I would have I think cared much more to have her be a part of the finding of this witness, because she has a lot of drive to save her brother, and I feel like it would have made more sense for her to be involved in the finding of the witness so that she could possibly, you know, find out whether her brother actually did these crimes. And the overall reveal of, first of all, who in the case Harriet's working on is placing the bombs, and the reveal of who exactly, you know, kidnapped this witness, it all kind of was very muddy, and I feel like that's because I didn't care. Like, I felt like about a quarter of the way through the story, I truly did not care about this book. Like, I feel like I just completely lost interest, and I found that I just wasn't like really invested in it. Like, I know what happens at the end of the story. I followed it. I understood what happened, but I just didn't care. And while I feel like the overall ending was pretty satisfactory for the case itself, the Sam storyline I was very disappointed with. I felt like it was kind of a cheap out for it, and it just doesn't make sense considering that there are 2 other books in this series. I gave it a 3-star because overall I did get through the book, but I think I may bring that down to a 2-star just because I feel like I just didn't care in this book. I really didn't. I there were some good elements to it. There was a, you know, the story itself was interesting, but I just felt like it was kind of just like I didn't care. I didn't really feel like I just wanted to read it. Like, I didn't care at all about the story. Then I got through more of Aragon, which was part of my HouseCupathon TBR, but I did not finish it, and I knew I was not going to finish it this weekend because I started this way too late in the month. So I got through like the first 100 pages, and I do actually like it. I like the story a lot. I like where it's going, but I haven't really had a chance to like fully sit down and immerse myself in it completely. I've kind of just been bouncing around with reading a few pages here, a few pages there, and then I sat down to read a little bit last night, and then Robert and I had a late dinner, and I was just really tired. Like, I felt very tired last night, so I just went to bed a little earlier, and then this morning I've been like up and around preparing for our live show that goes on today for the final feast quiz and all that jazz. But I did want to basically wrap up this vlog here because this is the end of the HouseCupathon, and this is the end of me doing vlogs for a little bit. So I've grabbed my laptop, and I'm gonna tell you guys my stats for this month and basically what I ended up doing with the HouseCupathon. So this month I read 24 books, mostly audiobooks, I will say, but only 2 of them were for my HouseCupathon TBR. I ended up actually getting the most books read on my team and earning the most points for my books on my team. I ended up making, by myself, 1,360 points total for my team, which is really good. Like, I though am so proud of Team Hufflepuff because they've really consistently done a great job. Everyone was reading great books and they was having a good time, and that makes me very happy because that's all I have always cared about. I just want people to really enjoy what they're doing and reading their books and just having a good time. Like, everyone's been having a great time with this, and we've already, as a group, the HouseCupathon prefects, discussed some of the things we would like to do for the next round, which includes actually giving a prize to the individual who is not a prefect that ends up getting the most points for the team through their reading and through the riddle challenges. Like, whoever earns the most total points in the readathon for themselves, if that makes sense, they will earn a prize and be considered the head student of the house, which is really fun. We had a really great idea with that, and I think that that's going to be very fun. We also had 2 people that completed all of their reading challenges on Team Hufflepuff, which was awesome. That was the Reading Aardvark and Vanessa, which I was so happy to see. Vanessa was the first person to complete all of their reading challenges, which made me super happy. Like, I was really excited to see that some people actually got to do that. Some people came very, very close to that, and I'm still just very proud of how everyone has done. I feel like everyone's had a really good reading reading month, and a lot of people have read quite a few books. Like, I'm really impressed. So we still have the final feast though that is going on later today in a few hours. Ends up, you know, giving up to 500 points worth of points to a team. Basically, everyone is gonna have a chance to answer questions about the group book that we all read, for the most part, which was Harry Potter and the Sorcerer or Philosopher's Stone. And essentially, each question is worth 5 points, and we have 100 questions on our document that we have that we are going to ask people. So it's going to be a pretty good live show. I think it's going to last about an hour, and then I think we're also going to reveal what the riddles were for the riddle challenge, like what the answers were for those, because we also have closed the riddle challenge aspect of the readathon, since that was going to go up to the day before the live show. So without further ado though, that is where I'm going to end this vlog here. Let me know what you guys ended up reading in January. Did you join the HouseCupathon? Did you have a good time? Did you, do a lot? Did you not read as much as you thought you would? Either way, whatever, let me know what you guys had read. So anyway, thank you guys so much for joining me. If you guys did enjoy this video, please do give it a big thumbs up. And if you're not already and you'd like to be, hit the button down below and subscribe to become an ally in our flock. And I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye, guys.